If the Dallas Cowboys do these three things, they are winning the Super Bowl. We'll tell you what they are next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. And joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we're taking a look at three things that, if they happen, will signal that the Cowboys are going to win this year's Super Bowl. And I know that, listen, talking about the Super Bowl with this current version of the team maybe is a little far-fetched, Landon. But we're going to lay out three scenarios that, if they happen, we're going to put the Cowboys on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're not putting easy goals in front of them. No. It's not three simple things to do and then they win the Super Bowl. These are three difficult tasks that, if they do accomplish, they do manage to hit these sort of standards, then they're going to be in striking distance, I think.
All right, let's start with the defense, because we know the Cowboys have a superstar in Micah Parsons. And we know that Daron Bland has already been an all-pro player. But in order for the Cowboys to take the next step as a defense, they need more Pro Bowl defenders on that side of the ball. And I'm going to say as many as 4. If you look at some of the previous Super Bowl champions, whether it's, the Eagles, who had Jalen Carter and Zach Bond, and their defensive backs were incredible, and they had Milton Williams and Josh Sweat, or the Chiefs with Chris Jones and Trent McDuffie and Nick Bolton. It seems like the magic number on defense is at least 4 Pro Bowlers. And I know that's a lot, but it seems like that's what the Cowboys will need to get to this year.
Yeah, and you feel like you've got 3 or 4, maybe 5 guys that are kind of all in striking distance of that. That's kind of their realistic in-season goal. It feels like outside of that group, you need probably another 2 players at least to kind of break out, out of kind of nowhere and show up in sort of the Pro Bowl ballots, the all-pro votes, right? And if you could get the kind of, play that you've come to expect from the Trayvon Diggs and the Micah Parsons of the world, and then maybe get an all-pro season out of Overshown, or a Pro Bowl season out of Sam Williams, or Maris Leofau comes in and takes the world by storm. I think that should be enough talent to make your defense good enough to be kind of in that striking distance of a top 10 defense.
Yeah, and I think the guys that are the easiest to project would be Daron Bland, because he's starting the season healthy, Micah Parsons, obviously, and Osa Digizua. Those are your 2 of your high money guys, with Parsons and Osa, and then Bland, who's already done it. It's just, who's going to be that last guy? Who's going to be the Cowboys version of Zach Bond, the guy that goes from borderline starter to all-pro guy that's making big-time plays in the postseason? I think you mentioned the guys that could potentially be. I think Leofau is a really good one. If it's Marshawn Kneeland and he just takes a massive step, think about what that would mean for your defense, having Parsons and Kneeland. If it's another corner, let's say, what if Kyrie Elam puts it all together and he has an outstanding season on the outside? Again, I know it's wishful thinking, but this happens all the time. We have a couple guys every year come out of nowhere and have big seasons. The Cowboys really need 2 more on top of Bland, on top of Parsons.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, not just with the numbers thing, it's a little bit about where they play too. Like,
sure,
if you got Mozzie Smith coming in and having a Pro Bowl season, that's going to move the needle a ton more than adding a third cornerback,
or Malik Hooker, right? Like, if Malik Hooker exactly has a good, he's got 6 turnovers or whatever, and he makes it. I think you're right. Mozzie Smith doing it or Marshawn Kneeland doing it is just going to be way more valuable than a safety doing it.
Or, I think linebacker too, just because you need a talent at that second level to kind of help balance out geographically the defense a little bit. So I think Overshown or Leofau breaking out, or Sanborn just having an extraordinary season or something like that, I think that would also go a really long way to improving this defense in areas in which maybe it's not quite as strong as compared to pass rush coverage.
I could see the Cowboys having a average to above average defense just with Parsons and Bland, and then, everybody else filling in the gaps. Like, I think they can do that. Well, one of the things that we've seen in recent years is it's really hard to win a Super Bowl unless you have, a top 10 defense. The Chiefs have relied on their defense to carry them the last couple of years. Philadelphia's defense was dominant, right? Last year, the 49ers, even though they didn't win the Super Bowl in 2023, that was one of the strengths of their team. So I think there's a pretty big difference going from like the 12th best defense to like the 5th best defense, right? Because once you get one of those top 5 defenses, now that's something that you can lean on and you can win games with that unit alone. They've had really good defenses, Landon, under Dan Quinn, but it never felt like they were dominating defenses that could suffocate you. It was more, they were turnover based, right? They were very much high variance.
Well, and it also felt like by the end of the season, they kind of ran out of steam, right? And they just weren't playing as aggressively or just as, the results just weren't as high. So I do think that it's a lot about playing your best defense at the right time of year as well, right? Like not just feasting on teams in October and September. It's about like being solid and especially at the end of the year when the best teams are making it harder on offenses. Your team should be doing that as well. You shouldn't be hoping that your defense, and that's what it's felt like at times, right? When we went into the playoffs with Dan Quinn's defense, it's like, I hope the defense can hold on to long enough to continue to play good, because you feel like as the season kind of wore on, they just weren't as capable of getting turnovers as game-changing plays as it felt like they were earlier in the season.
Yeah, and that's not just a Dan Quinn thing, but he's kind of had that problem for a while, right? Like whether it was Atlanta, where that was an issue in the postseason, or the Cowboys, or even with Washington last year, you saw it, in the postseason. Like they had a hard time when they weren't getting turnovers. But I think Matt Eberflus's defense, while they don't get as many turnovers, and there's obviously a downside to that, I think they're a little bit more fundamentally sound, or at least that's the hope.
Yeah.
Like that's the way he's been with Indianapolis and with Chicago. I think that's what you're hoping for here with Dallas.
And I think that's important to have, because, part of the issue with a lot of these defenses, I mean, frankly, you want go look at the teams that Washington actually had to play in the playoffs when they got there. Like, they're very good teams on paper, and we look back at their defensive DVOA and, oh my gosh, how'd they do it? But if you actually go and watch the teams as they played them that week, they were shells of themselves because they have been so ravaged by injury. So it's important to have strong fundamentals, because by the end of the year, you may not have all 7 of those Pro Bowlers that you had in November. You may be missing some of those guys. And so you're going to need the guys that kind of step up in those games as the season rolls on to play good football as well, and be ready to play good football at the end of the year.
All right, so that's step number 1. Have multiple Pro Bowlers on defense outside of Micah Parsons, outside of Daron Bland. What's step number 2? Well, it involves the offensive line, and we'll tell you about it next. This episode is brought to you by Rugiet. Guys, you probably have heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them, but if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to Rugiet.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. There's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatments. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but not FDA approved, and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit Rugiet website for full safety information. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are talking about 3 keys for the Cowboys to make the Super Bowl and win it this year. We talked about the defense. Later, let's talk about the offensive line. What does this offensive line need to do in order to take that next step?
Yeah, it's got to be one of the best young offensive lines in all of football. And I think, you and I were talking about this pre-show. I think a good standard for kind of measuring that, and this isn't the only way to measure whether they're a good young offensive line, but make Tyler Booker your fifth best offensive lineman. And what I mean by that is everything else. Tyler Booker's a rookie coming in. He's the only rookie coming in starting on this offensive line. You've got 2 other young players who, one of which you feel pretty good about, one of which was very up and down, but he's penciled in as a starter at left tackle. You've got Terrence Steele on the outside who had kind of an up and down last 2 years. If the 3 of those guys can figure it out enough to the fact that they aren't the problem. We've talked about how the offensive line is a weak link system, right? And that it's more important that your worst player is at a high enough level than it is your best player being at a superstar level. Defensive backfield is very similar to this, right? It's because teams know how to attack those systems. So you need to make sure you have a high floor system, because one weak link is going to spoil the bunch, right? So I think that by having a situation in which Tyler Booker, who is a rookie, who should be, the 5th best offensive lineman on this roster, I think that's a good indicator that Tyler Guyton did what he needed to do in the offseason to get better, that BB continued to go from what we saw last year, and that Terrence Steele is taking to the coaching and the changes and the techniques that are being implemented by Connor Riley and Clayton Adams to the point where those guys aren't the problem. Now all you're worried about is getting this young rookie up to speed. That would be a big step towards making this offensive line something to talk about by September and October.
Yeah, and I think there's a scenario where the Cowboys could have an average offensive line and make the postseason and potentially win a playoff game. But for them to win a Super Bowl, I think they need to go multiple steps better than that. They need the offensive line to be the best unit on the roster. Like, that needs to be their strength that they can rely on each and every week, because I think as the defense starts to get healthier, they're starting the year already banged up. They need to implement a little bit of that 2014 Cowboys where, hey, we're just going to run the ball at you, play ball control, and limit the number of possessions that the opponent has, because we're protecting our defense a little bit. That offensive line was extremely young as well. Remember, Cowboys drafted a guard in 2014 in the first round at Zach Martin. Now, the difference was he came right in and was
pretty good.
I mean, I was going to say the second best offensive lineman on the team.
Yeah,
probably.
I mean, definitely at that point for sure. Yes.
Yeah, but think about your worst offensive lineman on that team was Ronald Leary, probably.
That's right. That's right.
So,
and really underappreciated player at this point.
Yeah, I mean, maybe Doug Free, who was a top 10 right tackle in the league. Yeah. That's pretty high expectations, but they need to replicate that a little bit if they're going to want to, over perform this year.
Yeah, I agree. I think that with Dak, we keep talking about what is it going to take to help Dak get over the hump here, and I think everyone has just kind of in the media said, oh, the Pickens situation, and I think we'll talk about that. I do think that that's important, but I think that you needed to add another dimension to this offense, right? Like, and having a relied upon solid offensive line allows you to run the football in a way that helps Dak immensely in just the obvious play action aspect of it, the fact that he doesn't have to be the entirety of the source of offense at all points, and then of course the other aspect, he benefits when the defense is benefiting. When he's benefiting when he's not having to keep up with a team that's scoring, that's able to score 35 points on your defense because they're getting so many opportunities and so many snaps. So I think the initial thought process with this whole exercise would be, how do you make Dak better? Dak needs to play better. But I think the formula of the young offensive line being the best in football, and then what we'll talk about in the next segment, Those are the two individual things that we think need to happen in order for Dak to play better in the playoffs.
And I'll say, I think it starts in the middle between Tyler Smith, Cooper Beebe, and Tyler Booker. Like, you've invested a lot of resources, 2 first-round picks and an early third-round pick. That has to be the strength of the offensive line. The tackles, you have an undrafted tackle who's getting paid a lot of money. You've got a first-round project at left tackle, but it's the inside that really needs to be the foundation of this team. And with the running backs you have on the roster, there's just not a lot of guys that I think are going to necessarily add value and speed, maybe outside of Jaden Blue. You need to be a punishing run game where on 3rd and 2, you're going to move defenders off the ball. You need to be able to convert in the goal line situations. And that was one of the biggest issues the Cowboys had last year is they could get to the red zone, but once they got down to the 5 or 6 yard line, I mean, I'm sure you guys remember us talking about this during the season. Like, they had major red zone problems, and maybe George Pickens helps. We'll talk about that in a second. But just being able to run the ball down the middle is going to be a huge thing for the Cowboys if they want to reach their ultimate goal.
I mean, you're going to play a quarter of your games, if I'm not mistaken, doing the math there, against Dexter Lawrence and Jalen Carter. So it's important to have a strong interior offensive line, as in this division. And look, Newton is no slouch.
And Daron Payne, Washington's got dudes up there as well.
That's right. Yeah. So all 3 of your opponents have got serious dudes up front, and you're going to play 6 of your 17 weeks in that situation. So you've got to have a way to solve that doesn't include holding on for your dear life, and especially because when it's your interior, like, that's the most important spot, especially as we've talked about with Dak Prescott. He needs a comfortable pocket because he likes to step up into the pocket to deliver the ball, as opposed to like trying to roll out or escape out the side. So I do agree that the interior of the pocket is going to be a huge part of making sure that this offensive line reaches the potential it needs to in order to win the Super Bowl.
Just look at their schedule coming in. Just to start the season, you play Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, and then Dexter Lawrence and all of the guys that the Giants have. You play the Jets with Quinnen Williams. You play the Packers with Kenny Clark. You play the Broncos with Zach Allen, the Raiders with Christian Wilkins, the Chiefs with Chris Jones. I mean, it's relentless. It's relentless what kind of defensive tackles they're gonna play this year. They have to be good at that unit, because if they struggle at all, I think the offense can still be good, but they need to be elite for this team to go deep into the postseason.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same old dance, right, guys? Like, I mean, if they don't have what they need, then the solution is going to be for Dak to try to make up the difference. And what have we seen when Dak tries to make up the difference? That's when the problems start, right? Yeah. Because Dak is an aggressive quarterback, and when he has to, by default, and when he has to kick up his aggressiveness even another notch to make up for a lack of talent around him, I think that's when we see what Marcus calls the sweaty Dak. Like, I think that's when we see, the kind of too hyped or trying too hard to fit the ball into a tight window because he knows he has to, because this is his only chance to throw a ball upright, in the next 4 attempts. We got to get that situation away from Dak. He deserves more opportunities to be comfortable and have better weapons around him. We'll talk about that, the weapon part, the next section, but it starts up front because he's got to be upright and he's got to be able to turn around and hand the ball off and get success.
Yeah, let's talk about the weapons. What do the Cowboys need out of George Pickens in order to win the Super Bowl? We'll tell you next. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, all of your investments, and your spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. My wife and I have started using Monarch Money over the last half year or so, and it's unbelievable how much money we are wasting on trivial things like too many coffee runs or football card purchases. Whatever it was, we were wasting money. But with Monarch Money, we're starting to save more, we're building our wealth, and we're just in a much better financial position. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, Landon, the last thing that needs to happen for the Cowboys to win the Super Bowl is
the Pickens project has got to work. I think they've invested in him. We know. Look, the reason he's available, the reason that this is an option, is because there's clearly some kind of maturity issues or something that's going on with Pickens. And part of what has happened in Pittsburgh in the past with Pittsburgh is something that I think the Cowboys have kind of just cooked into the situation. Right, it's part of the compensation they traded. It's just something they know they're going to have to deal with. Obviously, the hope has been, as we've talked about, that all parties are kind of looking in the same direction here. Everyone is on the same page about wanting to get Pickens to a big contract from somebody, and so at the end of the day, that has got to hit. And it doesn't necessarily just mean production in the sense of receptions or yards or touchdowns, though all those things obviously need to come as well. I think one of the bigger aspects of it is just the gravity that he creates on offense that allows for PCM and Ferguson to kind of feast underneath. And I think I've been talking about this more and more, even in situations where it's a run formation and you've got just two wide receivers in the field, just having a secondary guy out there that you have to account for in the passing game that you can't just put into man coverage. It screws up the numbers, and then it can really help an offense kind of put the defense into a disadvantageous situation and run fits and that sort of thing. So Pickens has got to be a source of concern for defenses. He's got to earn that source of concern with his production, with yards. But after that, it's also got to be about defenses being concerned about what they're going to do with Pickens and also what they're going to do with CD. And then that will open up the offense in a way that will really hopefully make everybody productive.
Yeah, I don't think there's a certain number that he needs to get to in terms of yards or touchdowns, because there's a scenario where he has 900 yards and 8 touchdowns, and that's way better than a 1,300 yard season, because the 13 yards, maybe he gets it a lot in garbage time, right? And that's not necessarily what you want, right? I think it's more about moment in game, right? Like, hey, it's 3rd and 6, and George Pickens catches a 50-yard bomb to get you into field goal range, or in the red zone, or hey, it's CeeDee Lamb is out with a cramp, he's going to miss a drive. Pickens, come be the number 1 receiver, be the guy that's going to move the change for us, or change. You'll see it. Like, you're going to know as a fan whether or not the Pickens thing is working out just by how the game is going. If CeeDee Lamb is going off and he's having these monster games and Pickens is 3 for 40, great. The Pickens, it's working. But if he's getting 120 yards on 15 targets and the offense just isn't working that well, it's not working. So I get it. I think it's going to be very clear and obvious to fans out there.
Yeah, and I think you'll also just be able to see it in the coverage that CD's facing, right? Yeah. Is he it's going to be a lot harder for teams to kind of constantly double and or triple team CeeDee Lamb because of just like I said, the gravity that's being pulled over to the other direction. I just think there has been so many times. I mean, listen, if you're looking for a true indicator of where things would be different, just think about like how short this defense felt. Short's not the word, but like contained in a box this defense felt, right? Like it just felt like everything was the offense. Yeah, everything was operating in the top in the first 15 yards, and they weren't trying anything down the field. Defenders were dropping their players into the box to kind of crowd things. It was crowding the run game, which is causing problems. Nothing was really going down the field, it felt like. And part of that was obviously Cooper Rush and him being in the game for a good portion of the season. But even before that, the Cowboys just didn't have anyone that was threatening the defense down the field. So just seeing how these defenses are physically playing their coverage, how they're lining up, I think we'll notice a change between this year and what we saw last year.
Yeah, and if this offense can just become more explosive, that was their biggest problem last year. Is they just couldn't hit big plays, and that was after in 2023 the Cowboys, I think, were like second or third in the NFL in 20+ yard plays. I think Pickens should help there if he can create those big plays and force teams to play more too high or more just deep safeties. I do think it could have a pretty massive impact for the Cowboys offense. So just to recap, we want to see the Cowboys have more than 2 Pro Bowlers on defense outside of Micah Parsons and Daron Bland. We'd like to see the young offensive line be the strength of this team overall. And then finally, the George Pickens project has to work. If they're going to win the Super Bowl, there's just no other way. They need Pickens to be the player that they traded for this offseason.
If they hit on all those things, I think they're going to have a really good chance of being serious contenders this year.
All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.